Now, that, excuse me, that's just saying something about the main ideas in Popper's and my views, and how I've developed some of Popper's thinking about the importance of free will and freedom. If anybody would like to ask a question about that or about anything else, fire away.
I just had a quick question. When you were talking about that, it sounded like you said that there are no constraints, like when you're deciding between, okay, do you choose to test an idea? What were the three things you said now? If you could maybe repeat that.
Accept, reject, or test.
All right. But isn't there some sort of a constraint from sort of like a metaphysical biases that we all have? I mean, there's always something running in the background, right? And those can change too, as that they dictate and you take the next step, and maybe you test something out, and after a while you might find yourself getting bored, and maybe you're entertaining different types of metaphysical ideas. So it seems to me that there is always some sort of a constraint, right? Unless maybe I misunderstood what you were saying.
Yeah, well, I agree. There's always some influences on you. There's always some influences, but there's nothing that determines you to go one way rather than the other. Now, my point in what I was saying was there's nothing in the problem situation that constrains you to go one way or another. You can accept, you can reject, or test. There's nothing in the information you have before you that determines one way rather than the other. Now, what you're adverting to is the fact that you may have certain predilections which incline you one way rather than the other. I agree. A metaphysical question there is whether those predilections can ever determine you.
Wouldn't metaphysics kind of, the questions that you ask are also kind of training from some sort of a metaphysical bias too, right?
Sorry, I didn't catch the end.
That's all I wanted to say, that to me, it seems like even the questions are guided by metaphysics. And again, I mean, I can see that can change over time. Maybe you keep asking and then you keep testing. And then after a while, you're like, okay, maybe I'm just starting to get bored. Maybe I just need to try something new. I'm not getting anywhere. But to me, it seems like there's always, to me at least, and correct me if I'm wrong, the metaphysics seems to be running in the background all the time. But we're not always stuck. I'm not saying that we're stuck in one place, but I was just trying to understand what you meant by not having that constraint. That's all. Maybe I was missing something. But.
Yes, can I say something? Because I sent you this because you wrote in your text for the website here what Popper meant in that. You were a Marxist when you were young, and you write, for the Marxist, people are products of their circumstances, people's ideas and theories are reflections, of course, of the material world, and so on. And I remember that I read something similar in Roberta Corvi's book, that she wrote that the core of the disagreement between Popper and Marx was not the economical or political doctrines, but the idea that Marxism treats man as a product of their economic structure as reducible to the social being, while Popper sees the individual as not completely free, but that it has a certain autonomy to change its life and to live as we want to, and to choose things, and that this is the core. And you write something similar actually, but and it's the second time that I see this. Only Roberta Corvi mentioned this, probably mentioned by other people too. It's weird that you found this in the philosophy of science and not in the open society. That's very funny for me. Yes, I'll let you talk now.
When I was a Marxist, Luke, I got very much into the philosophy of it rather than the economics and the politics. I started off being interested in Marxism as a political philosophy, but when I started to read what the Marxist has written, particularly Engels, I got an interest in philosophical questions, which I'd never had before. And so I got interested in Marxist views on things like epistemology and metaphysics. And that was what I was into when I went to the LSE. And there I got introduced to Popper's work, which really blew that whole lot away. After I spent the best part of my first year trying to show that Popper was wrong. And in the end, I just agreed, no, Popper's right. I can't argue against, I've got no good arguments against the man. And so I junked all of those Marxist ideas that I had in epistemology and metaphysics. And that effectively undercut Marxism for me. I really stopped being a Marxist after that. I was still some kind of socialist, but no longer a Marxist. And then later on, I read The Open Society and Its Enemies, and there I saw further arguments directed at Marxist social theories. So yeah, it's an odd way around to come at rejecting Marx, but that was the way it happened for me.
And you were at the London School of Economics when Popper had already left. He was retired already.
Yes, he was retired.
And who was there at that moment? Lakatos or?
No, he was dead. John Watkins was the head of the department.
John Watkins, yes. Somebody else, another question? Nope. Then maybe you go on with your talk then?
I've got a question. Yes. Hi, Danny. It's good to see you. So, I mean, currently, I'd say let's get away slightly from philosophy and talk about the current circumstances going on with how the government is responding to COVID. And so I didn't catch the earlier bit of your what you were saying, so forgive me. So there's this pandemic called the COVID, right? And the government is trying to respond using policy to this pandemic. And sometimes people do say that policies are normative and that evidence is all evidence is tentative and that is conjectural. How do you suppose, from a Popperian perspective, one might understand how the government is responding to it? Would you say that they are doing something like a conjecture and refutation, or would you say that their policies are much more informed not by evidence but by sentiment or by fear? I suppose. I'm not sure whether I've made any sense or not.
Yeah, I think I know what you're saying. I'm not enough. I don't have enough knowledge in epidemiology and such things to be able to come to an opinion on that. Really, I would hope that they're following the science, because the scientific theories are normally the best theories we have. They may not be true, but we go with what is the best we have. And so I say, I would hope that that's what they're doing.
So in your sense, to follow up then, would following the science be following the best theory that you have available?
We're not constrained to do that. What they could do, if it was possible, and I don't think it is in this situation, would be to carve the country up into different areas and put the best theory that we have to test in some areas, but then to try some other theories and some other ones and see how they go, because they might be better. It will probably raise objections because you're playing risk with people's lives and so on. But then you're doing that always. But as I say, I'm not I don't know what the best scientific theories are on this. I don't know what the situation is. I trust the government's doing the best it can, which is a lot of trust. I don't know if I'd trust them actually, but I give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yes, and I have felt for some time I've had private discussions. I've had some private discussions with people that some of my friends that the 3 or 4 tier system that we had, it was almost Popperian in the sense that it was allowing, it was devolving the decision making to different local authorities to act based on evidence. But I mean, in the Agassi session, I did raise another point, which was, you know, I suppose one might call it a distinction. I'm not sure whether it's a logical distinction or not between having you know, evidence and acting on it. You know, what's the middle way, or what's the glue that, you know, that informs that transition? Is it you know, fate? Is it action? What is it? You've talked about either accepting, rejecting, or testing the theory. So what kinds of normative considerations will inform such an action, or are they any at all?
What I was saying was the evidence won't constrain you one way or another. You make a decision, you can decide either way. Also, because of the problem of induction, if you choose the poorly performing theory at the moment, you could actually turn out to be right. So nobody can say beforehand that choosing the best theory is actually going to work, because it might be this time that it's refuted. So there's no link between this is the best theory, so we must act on it. But in general, especially if you're in a government with a position of responsibility and you're going to be held to account, then I think going with the best tested theory is the best course for you. Though it would be better if it was possible to have alternative experiments going on as well, where you're trying different things so you can compare.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hello, Danny. We can go on now with, I don't know, where did you leave? Hello. I don't hear you.
Are you talking to me?
No, keep struggling with my mute button. It's okay, I've got it now.
Okay.
Now, one of the things I've criticised Popper for is his resolute claim that the aim of science is truth. Now, there was just a discussion with Jeremy Shearmure a moment ago, in which people were talking about the importance of truth and being committed to truth, and some people are not committed to truth. I did not comment on that discussion because it wasn't really, what I have to say was not really relevant there. In that discussion, what was important was that some people are committed to objective ways of making decisions and other people just do it subjectively. So that's an important distinction. And you don't need the notion of truth for that. But to bring truth up in that discussion would have been, you know, making the nice abstract point, which is not really connected to the points being made. So I didn't mention it there. Now, the reason why I say the aim of science isn't truth, or can't be truth, or shouldn't be truth, is that we have no way of telling whether a theory is true. All the tests that we have do not, a theory can survive all the tests we have, and it can be either true or false. I'll very briefly say why. If the theory's passed all the tests that we've set it so far, it could be refuted next time. So the fact that it's so far successful doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean it's false, it could be either. If a theory's been falsified, that doesn't mean it's false, because the observation statement that falsifies it could be false instead. So the fact that a theory has been falsified, again, doesn't show that it's false, and it doesn't show that it's true either. Now, some theories are better than others because they explain more, or they unify different areas of thought and so on. There's a whole load of reasons why one theory is better than another. But the fact that one theory has all those properties to a greater extent than another theory, a competitor theory, doesn't mean that the former theory is true, because we know from the history of science that we constantly get this situation where a successor theory is better than its previous one in all those respects, and then the successor theory of that is similar, is better in all respects. So you've got, say, 3 different theories, each of which was at its time the best available according to our criteria, and yet they all contradict each other. So at least 2 of them are false. So the fact that the theory meets all these, has all these properties that make it a desirable theory, doesn't show that it's true. doesn't show that it's false either. Nothing that we have shows whether a theory is true or false. Now, I just top this off with one other point, which often comes up. If the theory is self-contradictory, then it's false, eh? Well, not necessarily, because in classical logic, yes, it would be false, but there are rivals to classical logic, and we don't know for sure which logic is the true one. In paraconsistent logics, Dale-Lithaic logic, for instance, some self-contradictions are true. So the fact that a theory is self-contradictory doesn't necessarily mean it's false. So there is no reason for us ever to say the theory is true or to say that it's false. Now, it doesn't mean the notion of truth is useless. We need it when we talk about, well, I've been using it all the time there. Truth is not the aim of science, but we need the notion of truth to be able to say that. Also, when we do logic, we'll say, if P entails Q, then it's impossible for P to be true and Q to be false. So we're using the notion of truth and falsity there when we do logic. We need the notion of truth and falsity, but that does not mean that we can tell when theories are true or false. So if we can't tell whether a theory is true or false, then we can't sensibly say that the aim of science is truth, because we never know whether we're going to get there.
Yes, and I'm not particularly familiar with the debate that you had with David Miller on this, but I did read David Miller's Out of Error. And in Out of Error, if I'm not mistaken, there is the argument of, also it seems to me, of truth as a regulative concept. So say that a theory passes a number of tests and you tentatively classify it as true, but then it's still a conjecture that you are making, that I'm deciding to classify this particular theory at this particular time as true, and I'm classifying a rival as false. And so would you not say that at the minimal, some basic theory of verisimilitude is important in science? What would you say to that? And could that not be, could truth not then be some kind of normative value or aspiration that all of us are interested in?
I don't think so.
And would that not undercut your theory? Sorry.
Yeah. No, you can certainly conjecture that a theory is true. You can do what you like. You can do that if you want. But my point is that it's a purely arbitrary conjecture. You can equally well conjecture that it's false. And just making purely arbitrary conjectures is not very good. But you can do it. But the next step is to find ways of making it non-arbitrary, i.e. testing it, and to show that it's better than some other one. But you can't do that in connection with truth, because we have no way, we have no properties by which we can tell whether a theory is true or false. So, yeah, David Miller says you can conjecture that a theory is true. Yeah, of course you can, but it's entirely arbitrary. It's not a sensible way to proceed. Now, other properties instead of truth, yes, we have them. One theory may explain more than another one. The ones I mentioned earlier on. One theory may explain things in different areas, whereas another one doesn't. So there are various properties that theories can have. It's an objective matter whether one theory is better than another, but truth doesn't come into it.
Could I maybe ask, it appears to me that in logic, the way we talk about truth is a little bit different, say in science. Those of us who are scientists aren't merely interested in logic as much as logic is part of it, but we're really interested in knowing something about the world. I kind of really like when Popper says that our theories are like nets that we cast on the world in hopes of catching some part of it. If that's not truth, then what is it? And if we can't really, to me, yeah, I may not be able to know what part of my theory is true, or even in what sense it's true. Maybe in going from, say, Newton's theory to Einstein, saying that maybe, space isn't this or time isn't this, maybe that's the truth, but I can't be sure, if that is the part. But surely there's a difference between logic and science. And as a scientist, I'm interested in logic as part of it, but I'm definitely interested in something else. So we have to have a term for that, right? I mean, there is a usefulness. There is something we're saying there. Would you agree?
Yes, there's something useful, but it's not truth. It's the property that I mentioned earlier. One theory might explain more than another. It might produce novel new predictions which survive testing. It may solve problems that have not been solved by any other theory before. You know, there could be all sorts of reasons, objective reasons for preferring one theory to another, but they're not anything to do with truth, because they can't be.
That's a really provocative theory you have there. I'm going to have to read your paper.
Can I just add something? Like even the traditional definition of truth as true justified belief separates truth from knowledge. Sorry, the traditional definition of knowledge. So this separation between truth and knowledge even predates Popper. So there's nothing terribly novel about separating truth from knowledge as a useful distinction.
I agree. I agree. But I was criticizing Popper.
I have a question.
Oh, sorry, am I interrupting anyone? I guess I'll just go ahead and ask the question. What do you think about Popper's theory of correspondence to the facts, truth as correspondence to the facts that he got from, I think, Tarski? Can we use that to speak about truth in some useful sense?
I think that's fine as an explanation of what truth is. Popper, for a while, did not accept the correspondence theory of truth because he didn't know what sense could be made of saying that a statement corresponded to a fact or a statement corresponded to the world. He found that obscure, and he just bypassed the whole issue. But then when he met Tarski and he saw Tarski's explanation, he changed his mind. Now, Tarski's explanation is, in a way, it's very simple. Snow is white. The sentence "snow is white" is true if and only if snow is white. So that's what correspondence means.
Yes.
This bus is red is true if and only if this bus is red. Great, easy to understand. But the next thing was to produce a definition of that. To use that, those are just example sentences. Tarski went on to provide a definition of truth. That, in my view, was not at all successful. What he defined truth for a specific language, which is not truth, and his definition was begins with a load of lists. I won't go into the technicalities, but I don't think it works at all as a definition of the notion of truth. It defines true in L for some abstract language L. So that bit of Tarski, I would reject the definition of truth. But there was something very important he did as part of that, and that was to give an explanation of the quantifiers in quantification theory that depended on terms rather than on sentences. So it was an alternative to Frege's account of the quantifiers. And I think that from a logical point of view, that was very important. But it's not really anything to do with the question of truth. It was just a byproduct of his work on truth that turned out to be very important. Did that answer your query, Sam?
Yeah, I think so. I think I have. We've talked about this before elsewhere, but it's I think as a scientist or as a physicist, I like this notion of where there's this object level discussion that we're having, and I think Tarski's sense of truth is useful for that object level discussion, because we would like to say, oh, well, you know, if you're mining for gold, then there is gold in the place you're mining for, if and only if there's gold. If you have some theory about there being gold in the ground, and there's a matter of fact about that, there's a truth of the matter. And I think you would say, well, there's no logical correspondence between your conjecture about there being truth and there being gold in the ground and there actually being gold in the ground. But that seems to me like unnecessary. Yeah, it's unnecessarily justificationist. We don't need that kind of certainty. I don't know. I'm just kind of yeah, I think there's a useful sense of talking about truth, but we seem to disagree about that.
I agree. I'm not trying to ban talk of truth. I use it all the time myself. All I'm saying is we can never know whether any theory is true or false, so we can't aim for true theories. I agree that if there's gold in the ground, then it's true there's gold in the ground. I mean, these are obvious little points, but we don't know whether there's gold in the ground. And we can never know that whether that theory, there is gold in the ground, we can never know whether that's true. Because even if we found something we took to be gold in the ground, that might be false. It might not.
Committing yourself. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
What's that?
Sorry, I interrupted you. Please go ahead.
I finished anyway, Sam. Do you want to come back?
Sorry, I either seem to be breaking up or. Anyway, I think you're being unnecessarily. We don't need that kind of certainty. I think we don't need to be certain that our conjectures are true. But
I agree.
But then, if you agree with that, then why? You kind of alluded to this when you discussed David Miller's argument. But if you agree that we don't need certainty, then why do we need certainty for truth? Like we have these conjectures about there being gold in the ground, then.
But I think you're conflating like ontology or metaphysics with epistemology, because truth is an objective fact. Like that is only one way. Like there are true facts, and they are. I don't want to say certain, but they're absolute. But that doesn't imply that we know them. Our knowledge is always imperfect, but truth itself is absolute.
Yes, but then there's. I think this is the distinction that I'm trying to make. There's something like the final truth, or certain truth, but then there's also something like our theories containing truth, and there's something like us finding out more truth when we're truth searching, when we're seeking truth, when we're doing science.
But how do we know they contain truth? Our theories.
Well, this is where I think I agree with David Miller. We just conjecture that certain things are true. And though we think our theories might be false because they will be replaced, there will be some truth in them. There will be like things that remain the same while we go from one framework, from one explanation to another.
But I mean, there are other alternative explanations for why false theories work.
Sorry, I don't quite get that point. Can you elaborate?
So you could have a false theory which has true implications, and it's just a coincidence that it has the same implication as a true theory. So
yes, but then, so I think there has to be an explanation for why certain explanations or certain parts of explanations remain the same. So, for example, we describe the world in terms of in physics. You describe the world in terms of usually differential equations. And that has remained the same from going from Newton's theory to Einstein's theory. So there's much that is different between Newton's and Einstein's conception of the world, the conception of the universe, but there are certain things which have remained the same and which we expect to remain the same when we go to the next theory. And I think those things capture some truth about the world. And then I validly guess that they do, that is something true about the theory, even though the theory itself is imperfect and will probably be replaced and will contain falsehoods as well. But that seems to me like a useful sense of talking about truth, that we have there's some aspects of our theories that remain unchanged as we move to better ones.
Plus, the other thing is that there is a question that we should all ask ourselves: that why has science been so successful at explaining? It doesn't just explain the world; it actually helps us see ahead. Like the Dirac's equation is a beautiful example where the Dirac equation led to the discovery of antimatter, such a thing, we hadn't even thought about the existence of such a thing. And there comes this theory that, marries two, theories together, and there comes a child, and it surprised us. I mean, so our theories can surprise us in ways which makes us wonder, and that raises an interesting question. Well, why didn't that happen for such a long time, where people were describing phenomena in terms of all these Greek gods and stuff? Why didn't we have that success in that case? Why in science?
So I could conjecture an explanation that would not require our theories to be true. So we can say that there is an infinite amount of false theories out there. Some of the false theories have true implications. So if we start this critical project of testing and trying to form explanations, it would make sense that we would adopt some false theories because they have true implications and because they are useful. Doesn't make them true. It doesn't mean they contain truth. They just sort of coincide with what the truth actually is.
But we're not talking about one theory when we talk about science, right? And I guess what I'm saying is shouldn't we ask this question, that why is there this coincidence that there is this history of science?
Yeah.
In which we keep getting, we have to explain that. I think that's a real fact about the world, I guess, in a way, to us.
Yeah, I think my point is basically that what we're selecting for isn't necessarily more and more true theories, but more and more useful theories. And so that's sort of the key criterion we're focusing on. We can use this theory to make predictions that are better than our previous theory, or it explains more, so it's more useful in more contexts. But that's like a pragmatic viewpoint rather than a true in the traditional sense.
But aren't they a little bit more than useful? I mean, we aren't just explaining what's immediately right in front of us. They're like, again, they're taking us forward. They're taking us into the unknown. I think that in itself requires an explanation too. You see what I'm saying? Like, I mean, we could come up with an infinite number of theories that could just explain what's around us, like the people did in the past with all sorts of myths, involving gods and goddesses. But how far did that take us?
Yeah, but I mean, explanatory theories are better at making predictions than non-explanatory theories. So.
Also, if theories have more and more true implications, then what's the difference between that and saying that they contain more and more truth?
Sam, can I answer you there?
Yes.
You said a few times that the theories share bits which are true.
Yes.
But that, I think, is not the case. If you let's go to my favourite three, Kepler, Newton, and general relativity. They don't share implications. Or the observational predictions are not exactly the same. Kepler's predictions were different to Newton's. Newton's were more accurate, more exact. They were better than Kepler's, and similarly Einstein's are more accurate than Newton's. Now, if Einstein's are true, then both Newton's and Kepler's, I'm talking about the ellipses the planets follow, for instance, the orbit of the planets. If Einstein's right about that, then Newton was wrong and Kepler was wrong. There's not truth being carried forward. These theories contradict each other at the level of observation statements as well as at the high theoretical level.
Yes, but they are kind of incremental improvements on one another at the same time. There's something radically different about them as worldviews, but like, as I said, both Newton and Einstein suppose that you can describe the motion of planets as differential equations by differential equations, and you can they're both classical physics in the sense that their particles have a definite position in space. Things of that kind will remain the same while moving from Newton to Einstein, and those are, I think, in that sense, they're very similar. There's a lot of similarities between the theories, which I think needs some explaining, like why did some of that get carried over? And I agree that some of the conclusions are radically different, but that the explanatory frameworks are not entirely different.
Well, not entirely different, but they do contradict each other. That means that we were talking about truth, and truth goes out the window there, doesn't it? They're not sharing. I'm rejecting the point you made earlier that they share truth. They don't.
I think maybe the problem is that we're almost trying to imagine as if truth is something we're just going to have in our hand, something absolute. But I thought that the whole thing was that we're saying that, that's the absolute truth is not possible. And then we should reevaluate the question that in what shape or form is truth. I mean, that is another ongoing question that we should keep asking. Perhaps when we make an error or we learn from our mistake, maybe in that, we can pinpoint the whole debate on how Newton's theory takes space and time is something absolute, some sort of a rigid background. And then Einstein's theory becomes dynamical. But there's something that we have learned as to what space is not. Maybe that's the truth, but we can't be sure, just like with anything else. But there is something that we have. There are some insights we're gaining. Our intuitions are also changing. And we don't, even if we sometimes take some old theories and re-invoke them, they're never done in the exact same way. They're always in a different way.
I agree with that. Sorry, Frank, I'll let you in a moment. I think I agree with that. I'm not denying that there's value in the theories. I'm not denying that some theories are better than others. All that's true. All I'm denying is that we can never know whether a theory is true or false. Frank, go on.
Well, I'd like to just ask a question of everybody. I'm curious to know two things. How many of us in this group right at this moment, how many of us have read Objective Knowledge, the book Objective Knowledge? I'm just curious. Have any of you all read it? Popper's book, Objective Knowledge. Have any of you, did you say, have any of you read Conjectures and Reputations? What's the book you wrote? I see one nodding of a head. I'm just curious. Here's why I'm curious, and what I think might explain why the frustration that some of you are going to feel because you're not getting answers to your questions. It's difficult to sort all that out in the course of a Zoom conversation for an afternoon. And y'all have asked many questions, and there's nothing wrong with this. You got to ask questions. But you're asking questions that have been thoughtfully and articulatively answered in those two books. So I would suggest, if you really want to know the answers, or at least understand what's been said up till now, give those books a thoughtful read. You'll be glad you did. By the way, I try to get other people who never heard of critical rationalism to look at them too, and I'm not very successful there either. But this is a group that needs to read those books. You'll be glad you did.
Frank, I think many people here have read them, but
They didn't indicate that. I hope they have.
Yeah, but now I have to say that we have to cheer to Danny for all the work he did, and you will be back, Danny. You can stay here, but I have to leave. But Danny will be back with me at, what time is it? 8:30 in the evening, 20:30 GMT. We will have another chat with Danny. You feel free to hear. I don't know, then do you have to rest in the meantime, or can you stay on here?
Me? Yeah, hello. No, I've got to go away now.
You're what?
I've got to leave now, but I'll be back later.
You have to lay that. You have to rest.
Yeah, not rest. I've got things to do now.
Yeah, and then at 20:30 GMT, you are back with me.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Danny, bye bye, and I will invite everybody who is interested to come now to the Karl Popper Facebook page. That's in the other room, the room for the Karl Popper Facebook page. If you're interested, you can also come back this evening to see Danny again, or for a chat with Joseph Agasse, with Elise, or later with me and Danny. So we will see. I hope we will see you again this evening, Danny. So have a nice rest.
Cheers.
Yes, you are invited by me to come together to the other room, and I hope there will be some new people, maybe. And cheers, Danny, for all your work.
Cheers, Luke.
Yes, and I hope we see you this evening, and you have a good rest. Yes, okay.
Yeah, see you later.
Just need to refill this cup.
Yeah.
Give me 2 minutes.
Yeah, and a
Oh,
cup
yeah,
of
it's
coffee.
available. Do you need to get some coffee? Because I can wait.